But while we're on this topic of God, there's another question. This one was sent in. It's a very interesting question because from when you see it, when you first see it, it looks like a reasonable question. Why would God need people to worship him? Isn't that egotistical and arrogant? So, God is up there in the sky. Why would God need us to worship him? Why does God want us to worship him? And I'm gonna just briefly talk about it for a little bit, and then maybe we'll talk about it together. But why does God need us to worship him? I would probably say the first thing I'd probably say is that everybody worships something. Whether we admit it or not, we worship something. We admire something, right? We admire people. We admire things. We admire sports. We admire cars. We admire you name it, right? We worship. Maybe it's not in the way that we think of worship, but we admire. We exalt certain things, and we tell other people to worship it along with us. So we're all worshiping something, right? Every person worships something or worships somebody. But when we talk about the worship of God, we have to realize that God is not just a created being. He's not just, it's not like us speaking to ants and being like, hey, I'm greater than you, worship me. God he created us, and he is perfect in every sense of the word. God is, you could say he's the source of goodness. He's the source of love. He is love. He is all knowledge, all power, everything comes from God. It originates from him. He is the source of all goodness and love and mercy and everything. So when we begin to think, okay, this is who God is, the fact that we admire him because of this goodness is not just normal or it's not just a good thing. You would think, why wouldn't you worship God? Or maybe you could say, to worship, to admire something other than God is probably wrong, because you are taking your focus away from he who is perfect and holy and good in every sense of that word, and you're putting it on something that's lesser, that's not God, and he is altogether lovely, and everything else is just it's nothing compared to God. So why would we as human beings, as his creation, why would we worship anything but God? Like, why would we worship anything but the source of goodness and mercy? It just makes, not only does it make sense, but when you think about, he gave us everything we have, our five senses, our ability to reason, our ability to even ask this question, to walk, to do everything, that comes from him. So when we talk about, is it arrogant when God says worship me and don't worship idols, and it becomes actually the thing that you could say, this is good for us to look at God. This is actually, this is something that we should do it. We should worship God because of who he is. And this is what we're made for. And when you do it, you realize this. I'm looking upon my Creator, upon the source of goodness and mercy and everything else that I need in my life, and I'm exalting him and admiring him, and it changes me as well. And so this is why we worship God. So no, it is not arrogant for God to demand, even though he does not demand it in that way, but he calls us to himself, and he opens us up to worship him in that way. So I think it's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. And it's something that we're created for, right? I mean, what would you guys have to say about that?
I think that we, as human beings, infected with this pride and sin, we think we're equal to God sometimes. That's why we ask this question. And when it's asked towards us, don't you think it's arrogant and selfish to to demand worship yeah, because you're human. Yeah. You didn't create anything. You're not God. Of course, it's selfish and arrogant, but when you're referring it to God, it makes sense. That's what it should be. So it's not arrogant and selfish. That's correct. That He's the creator that deserves praise and worthy and adornment and everything that God deserves. It's His. So I think that's how I understand it. It's because the question comes from somebody who is saying, you know what, I don't think there's a God. We're all God. And, if this God exists, then He's just like us. He demands worship and praise. And I think that's how the question's set up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I agree with you on that, Andre. We have to understand and also reevaluate some things. Like you said, if I'm thinking of worship, I'm thinking of myself. Hey, Larry, you did such a good job. Good job, Larry. Go, Larry. So I would receive that differently. I almost want to say it as if, Apple made a product and they know exactly how it should be used. When God created humans, us, when He's saying, when He demands worship, I think He knows what's best for us. And I think it's best for us to understand that and give Him that worship. And worship really is our life. Our everyday life is a worship to our God, our Creator. So we have to first of all understand our relationship to God. God is the Creator. He created the universe. It says He holds the universe. He sustains the universe. But He gives us free will as humans in this universe. And when we choose Him, we live for Him. We worship Him.
Can I add a couple of points?
Yeah.
What's the alternative to worshiping God, right? Whether you want to admit it right away or not, you will realize that you will eventually come to worshiping yourself. If you don't worship God, you're going to turn to yourself, and that is the most selfish thing to do.
Yeah,
so if you're talking about egotistical, then that's exactly why God is doing this. It's like kind of like an antidote against this poison, right? And when you think about the words of Jesus that He said, it's a bigger blessing to give than to receive. And my personal kind of view of that is because the giving depends on you, the receiving depends on the giver, right? Some other giver. So it's easier to give, it's more blessed to give. But the thing that I want to highlight is when you come to God, you're never going to leave empty. He will never let you go empty-handed. We come to Him broken, we come to Him empty, we come to Him with questions, we go away with answers. So He doesn't want us to worship Him for Him. He really wants us to worship Him for ourselves. The other thing I wanted to add also is if you think about this kind of like, I guess in a hierarchical way, right? God is foremost and foremost and outmost, right? He's the highest position of authority. There's nobody above Him. So the question is, what other side would you rather be on, if not on God's side? If you are worshiping God, then the order is natural. You're in alignment. You're exactly in the alignment that devil wasn't in, and that's why everything went haywire for him, for his life. So it just makes sense to show worship, to show respect, to show to give honor to God, and God will not delay blessing you in response and giving you what's best for you. So that's my couple of points I want to add.
Can I add one last thing? The quote, there's a God-shaped vacuum in our hearts. It actually comes from Pascal, who was a genius mathematician, French. He has a lot of awesome quotes, but he lived for himself in the beginning of his life, and then he had a tragic experience that turned him to God, and then he repented and he quoted this quote that's world renowned, but he basically just observed what we all really observe, is that we have this vacuum inside of us that is demanding worth, and we try to, if somebody gives us that worth, we feel great for a little bit, right? And then it's gone. And we, this vacuum in our soul, if hey, you know, if we create worshipers, we'll feel great all the time or whatever. And it's crazy, but if we return that to God and give that to God, and He fills us, then we actually have worth. And that's the wraparound that the devil pitches with his pride thing. You know, hey, you know, live for yourself, live to build you up. And God's like, actually, no, if you want to survive this world, die for yourself. Give yourself up. And then you'll actually live.
C.S. Lewis put it beautifully when he said, there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who bend their knee to God and say, your will be done. Or those who say, no, I will not bend my knee to God. And God steps away and says, your will be done. But the Bible says that in the end, every knee will bow. So I choose to bend my knee now, recognizing that He is the one that created me. He is the one that sustains me. But also, it's not coerced. Nobody's making me do this, you know. I used to live a different life. This wasn't me. I know Andre. Andre was not a good guy either.
Come on, Larry. Don't tell him
Really?
that.
Is that true, Andre?
Larry, seriously.
But I know that
This is live to the world, okay? You can't tell them that.
you know, you can testify to this as I can, that it's not easy to be a Christian. It didn't become easier for me to be Christian. I'll tell you that. Life did not become easier. But I do have peace knowing that I am in peace with God. I have that relationship with God. Not a religion, relationship. Knowing God. It's not knowing about Him, but knowing Him personally. It's like a relationship between me and my wife, me and my kids. You know, it's completely different. But the Holy Spirit has changed me personally from the inside out. I used to be different. I didn't have much tolerance for people who, well, let's just say I didn't have much tolerance for people at all. Only the people that I loved were the people that I had tolerance for. Everybody else wasn't, you know, on the wrong side of the stick every time, seems like.